Hi, everyone. This is Dr. Grace Estrada. Thank you for joining me. This is Psych 92, and today we're going to talk about socio-emotional development in middle and late childhood. So first of all, some objectives. We're going to describe Erikson's industry versus inferiority stage, discuss changes in self-esteem and social comparison, also talk about the beginnings of moral development using two theories, one from Piaget, the other from Kohlberg. And finally, describe the increased importance of friends and peers. Talk about types of friendship, sociometric statuses, and bullying, and also explain the importance of family stability. So first, let's talk about Erikson's psychosocial stages. As you can see, stage one was trust versus mistrust. That would be about birth to 1 year. So that means that the first stage that children must go through is deciding whether the world is a safe place that will meet their needs. So really the caregiver's job is to develop that trust in the infants. Now, once they feel like the world is a safe place, then they can successfully move on to stage two, which is autonomy versus shame. So in this stage now, this is consider this like the terrible twos, right? Children want to establish their independence. So if caregivers are supportive of it, then they will feel confident in developing autonomy. On the other hand, if they mess up and the caregivers make them feel bad about the mistakes, then they'll instead have shame and won't feel so confident about going out in the world by themselves. By stage three, now we're looking at school age, about 3 to 5 years old. Initiative versus guilt is this stage. Now, in initiative versus guilt, this is an awesome stage where kids actually are motivated, self-motivated to help out and to contribute to their family, to their community. And so the idea there is if they are supported and they feel like, yes, their help is needed, they'll continue to build on that. On the other hand, they may feel guilty if they don't feel like they're contributing enough to their family or community. Now we're in stage four, industry versus inferiority. Industry in this component really talks about being busy, achieving goals, setting goals and achieving them. So what we want is to encourage children by giving them opportunities to, first of all, set their own goals, and secondly, to work on it by themselves so that they feel confident that they can set and achieve these goals. On the other hand, they might feel inferior. So this is the age where social comparison comes in. And so if they look at their peers and they feel like their peers are doing more than they are, then they will have that sense of inferiority. Any questions about this? Okay. Self-understanding. So there are a lot of self-hyphenated terms. Self-concept is the general understanding a person has about their personal identity. So it's more realistic than in early childhood. So remember, in early childhood, if you ask a child to describe themselves, they'll talk about capabilities or physical characteristics. Well, I have black hair, I have blue eyes, I can count backwards from 100. That's how they describe themselves. By middle and late childhood, they have a much more realistic understanding of what it entails. So you have the self-concept, which is the general understanding. Self-esteem, on the other hand, that is a more emotional, affective evaluation. It's an evaluative judgment of themselves. So this is where we talk about people possibly having high self-esteem, low self-esteem. We'll talk more about what impacts a person's self-esteem. So self-concept is general understanding of oneself. Self-esteem is the judgment somebody has about themselves as a person. And, there's a wide spectrum of that. And then there's self-efficacy, which is more about capabilities and behaviors. So that's the belief that you're capable of achieving a specific task or goal. And self-efficacy is, there could be global self-efficacy. In other words, generally, do you feel like you're a capable person? And then there are domain-specific self-efficacies. For instance, somebody might have very high self-efficacy in writing, and maybe poor self-efficacy in art, right? So these can be domain specific. To understand the differences between self-concept, self-esteem, and self-efficacy. So self-concept, general understanding about one's identity. Self-esteem is the feeling you have about yourself. It's an evaluative self-judgment. And then self-efficacy is the belief you have about your capabilities. So as I mentioned earlier, in early childhood, so about 3 to 4 years old, usually they're talking about observable attributes. Like I said, black hair, blue eyes, blonde hair, green eyes, those kind of things, being able to do things. Early childhood is wonderful because that is when children's self-esteem is at an all-time high. They are unrealistically positive, but it's a wonderful, refreshing discussion to have with them. By the time middle childhood comes along, now that evaluation of themselves has been very impacted by social comparison. Now they are in school by about age 5 to 11. They're seeing what other kids can do. Maybe they're seeing how other kids live, and all of that impacts their own judgment about themselves as people. So this is when children are actually especially vulnerable to esteem issues. So remember, self-esteem is like an overall sense of worth. So if you say, I feel good about myself, then you might say, this person has good self-esteem, right? It is really related to how satisfied people are with their lives and their overall outlook. And it's really affected by many factors. And it's, by the time people are in middle childhood, it's much more differentiated than in early childhood. So Harder is a researcher who realized that self-esteem really, there are two kind of components. There's the global self-esteem, is how do you feel about yourself overall as a person? And then there is domain-specific self-esteem, similar to self-efficacy. So in Harder's perspective, she says self-esteem is really a combination of things. First of all, domain-specific self-esteem. There is your competence in a specific domain. Combine that with how much somebody values competence in that domain. And if it is, you have competence and you have value, then it will impact your self-esteem. So if you don't have competence in a domain, but you don't value it, then it will not impact your self-esteem. So that's kind of the opposite there. So for example, I cannot do a pull-up. I want to do it, but so I have some value of it, but my identity is not all tied up into whether or not I can do a pull-up. So competence is low, value is kind of low, and so it doesn't really impact my self-esteem. On the other hand, my competence as an educator is very important to me. And so I highly value it. And so how I do in the realm of education really impacts my self-esteem. So here are some domains that a lot of research has been done in terms of children. So academic competence, athletic competence, job competence, behavioral conduct, social acceptance, physical appearance, romantic appeal, and close friendships. So research has been done in all these different realms. The top two that impact kids' self-esteem are number one, physical appearance, and number two, social acceptance. This probably is not a huge surprise. That you can just see how at this age, people are much more vulnerable. So this is a just kind of a graph of self-esteem. And as you can see, it's actually curvilinear. It is not linear at all. And the reason that is because you get to a point where somebody's achievement, right? So you have self-esteem. If you have low self-esteem, it's going to impact your ability to achieve things because you probably won't even try to do anything because your self-esteem is so low. So as people's self-esteem increases, their ability to achieve, accomplishments continues to increase until you get to about medium. And then if you notice, the self-esteem starts to go down after medium in terms of the self-esteem, the level of achievement starts to go down, even though self-esteem continues to rise. And the idea here is that if your self-esteem is like out of this world super high, you won't feel like you have to achieve anything. You already think you're wonderful, you're perfect. So why do you even have to try? So this is why self-esteem is actually a curvilinear model in terms of considering how it impacts one's achievement. Okay, so let's go next. Role of parents. So in terms of as caregivers, what can you do to help kids develop that self-esteem? First of all, accept them, love them, make them feel good about who they are as people, and it should not be contingent on what they're accomplishing. Set limits. It's important at this stage to really set limits for kids because they don't have a good sense of their own boundaries. And so you want to make sure that they're not, overstepping. They have to have that structure. It's important for them. Give them respect, right? Make sure they respect you, but also give them respect as well. So they understand their worth as human beings. And finally, provide moral guidance. We'll talk about morality. Okay, so when we talk about moral development, what we're really talking about is developing the sense of right and wrong. You can think of morality as, what do people do when nobody is looking? If you're doing the right thing because there's a camera on you, that has no indication of your moral development, right? It's really, what do you do? What are the choices you make when you are by yourself and nobody's looking and nobody can track you? So what we are interested in as developmental psychologists is, where does this sense of right and wrong come from? Well, we know socialization is a big part of it. Kids internalize society's moral codes. So what they hear in the media, what they hear their family members talking about, or what's going on in the community, although children might not be talking about it, they are actually internalizing all of these messages. So about harm and welfare, like, do we care about people who are unhoused or the poor or the elderly? Whose rights are we defending? Is there a sense of social justice that they develop? All of these things are messages that they hear from people around them and they internalize it. And this is where the idea of also peers comes in, right? So family and peers are very important in terms of moral development. So there are a couple of theories of moral development. We're going to look at Piaget's and also Kohlberg's. So essentially the idea is that because kids are internalizing messages from, others, that's sort of external. Those are external forces. And as children develop their own sense of moral development, that goes from the external forces impacting their decisions to internal forces. As children get older, they are less dependent on reward and punishment. So as you'll see when we talk about moral development, it starts off with, okay, I'm doing this because I'm going to get a reward. I'm going to get praise or candy or something like that. Or I will not do this because I'm afraid something bad will happen to me. That's the idea of dependence on reward and punishment. We go from that stage to actually internalizing the rules and standards in one's society. Obviously, this is going to be culturally specific. It's going to be influenced by one's culture. And eventually we go from being motivated by reward and punishment, desire for reward and fear of punishment, to finally having your own sense of what is right and what is wrong. So in Piaget's theory of moral development, right, what Piaget did is he loved to observe children. And so what he did in terms of moral development is watch children as they interacted with each other in a playground. And this is what he came up with. There are two stages, he felt like, in moral development. There is the externally imposed stage, which we call heteronomous. So if you think about hetero, that means different. So it's coming from someone different, not just you. So with heteronomous morality, kids are seeing the rules as being established by adults. And it's adults who determine what is right and wrong. It is adults determine what are the consequences if you violate these things, right? So this is about 6 to 9 years old. The second stage is self-imposed, and this is called autonomous morality. So now children kind of figure out, especially in the playgrounds, like, oh, we don't have to follow all the rules. We could actually start to adjust some of the rules based on who's here. So that's where we talk about kind of autonomous, self-imposed rules. This is about 10 to 12 years old. So by this time, kids might even make up their own games, or they adjust games. They learn to take in perspective, other people's perspectives, not just their own. And so it's a much more sophisticated way of thinking about morality than the heteronomous component. Kohlberg was someone who really was interested in this idea of moral development. And whereas Piaget looked at it from a playground perspective, what Kohlberg did was he gave a story about a hypothetical story that was a moral dilemma. And he presented it to people, and it was really, he looked at how people responded to it at different age groups. And that's how he determined levels of morality. So the Heinz dilemma is that Heinz was married to a woman who we love very much. And then it turns out that she is very ill. She has this rare disease. And only one pharmaceutical company has the cure for the disease, but they're very poor. So first Heinz goes to the pharmacy and, how much is this? And they're like, oh, it's hundreds of thousands of dollars for this cure. Well, he doesn't have any money. So he's like, oh, well, can I work it off? Can I pay it in installments? What can I do? And they're like, nope, it's all or nothing. Yes, you aren't going to have it. And he's like, but my wife will die without it. Sorry. Okay. So that evening, Heinz goes and breaks into the pharmacy and steals the drug for his wife. So now the question is, what should happen to Heinz because he did that, right? And so how people responded to it really helped Kohlberg determine their level of moral reasoning. So let's talk about it. First stage is the pre-conventional level. So if people said Heinz should have not have stolen it because it's against the law, he can go to jail, right? Then that's kind of focusing on fear of punishment. Oh my gosh, if he gets caught, he's going to go to jail. Or he's doing this because his wife will love him even more. So that's focusing on the reward. So if the person's reasoning, the motivation is self-centered, then they're said to be at the pre-conventional level. So what is right? Obedience to authorities. What motivates you to do what is right is fear of punishment. So that is what we call the pre-conventional level. This is generally young children, right? Where it's like, okay, clean up and you get 15 more minutes of recess or something like that. Second level is what we call the conventional level. So now, instead of being self-centered, reasoning is based on social relationships. So what is right? Upholding laws and contributing to society. What motivates you to do what is right is keep the social system functioning. So Heinz should not have stolen that because it's wrong. And people know that it's wrong. And he broke into the local pharmacist. What's going to happen to the pharmacist? So it's sort of the idea of the social fabric goes above personal need in terms of conventional level. Finally, post-conventional level. So now reasoning follows ideals and principles. Now we are thinking big picture, higher level, right? So what is right? Self-selected ethical principles. What motivates you to do what is right is the universal principles of justice. Yes, Heinz had to steal the cure because this, greedy pharmacist would not work with him. But he shouldn't go to jail because he did it to save the life of his wife, right? So you can rationalize things like that. The idea here is that in order to know what level of moral development someone is, it's you think about how they choose from right or right, what motivates them to do the right thing. So remember, for Kohlberg, there are 3 levels: pre-conventional, which is you're just thinking about yourself, punishment, reward. Conventional, you're thinking about the social system. And then post-conventional, where now you're thinking about abstract principles. Obviously, as people get older, it's easier to think about these. Remember, because of the concrete operational and formal operational stage of cognitive development, until you get to the formal operational stage, not even cognitively capable of the abstract principles component. So to think about this in terms of how it works along with cognitive development. Any questions? All right, so here is a nice table that summarizes the 3 levels of moral development. So level 1 is at the bottom, and it says values in external events. So there are 2 stages, according to Kohlberg, for each of these larger categories. So stage 1, punishment avoidance. Stage 2, getting what you want by trade-off, right? Then once you get past that, you're in the conventional stage. So this has to do with society, the social fabric, right? So stage 3, you're motivated by meeting the expectations of others. And stage 4 is you're fulfilling duties and upholding laws. So you see, it's a little bit higher level, right? It's not like, oh, mom expects me to clean my room, so I'm going to do it. And then the other reasoning would be, I'm going to clean my room because it helps keep the family harmony going, right? So think about the reasoning there. Finally, you have post-conventional, shared standards, rights, and duties. So now there's that sense of democracy and relativity of rules. Like, yes, there is a law against stealing. However, Heinz tried to do everything he could to get the medication legally, but the evil pharmacist would not give it to him, right? So relativity of rules. And then self-selection of universal principles. If we go with the principle that human life has value, then we need to do what we can to keep the human life and really help others. So some criticisms of Kohlberg's theory is that it's oversimplified. This is culturally specific, right? This is based on Western ideals, conformity, and norms. So somebody from more Eastern philosophy may not agree with how it looks. It also was based mainly on a male perspective, right? And, you know, there really isn't a really strong correlation between attitudes and behavior. So for example, if I were to ask the class, how many of you believe that it's important to take care of the environment? Most people raise their hands. And then if I say, okay, when was the last time, like, do you drive an electric vehicle? Or do you contribute to Greenpeace? Did you help clean up your neighborhood? Suddenly the hands go down, right? So there's the attitude that yes, the environment's important, but then when you ask about behavioral components, there's usually a disconnect. And that's the problem when you have hypothetical questions, is that the attitude does not always follow with the behavior. So in middle childhood, peers take on a much more important role than in early childhood. So by this time, kids are in school much longer, right? It's more challenging. About 40% of kids' waking time is spent with peers. That's a huge amount, right? So now we do have that whole idea of social comparison, and how kids fare in that comparison with others really impacts their sense of self. So in terms of playing games, you would go from the fantasy pretend play in early childhood, and now we're going to rule-based games. This is where a lot of sports come in, right? So when you have these structured activities, more kids can play and for longer. They learn that there are rules that are already established, but then you can also modify them. If you're creating your own game, then they get that sense of democracy of, oh, everybody has to have a say, majority rules in how the game is going to be played. So it's at this stage kids start to get that. In terms of friendship, the textbook talks about 2 main models of friendship. So first one is Bigelow and Lagaipa. So Bigelow and Lagaipa noted there were really kinds of friendships, right? There's reward cost, where Kids are friends because they have mutual activities. Maybe they're on the same soccer team, right? So with a reward cost friendship, a good friend is somebody who has similar interests. In a normative expectation friendship, now it's somebody, the normative expectation is like a good friend is someone who's kind to you, maybe someone who will share things with you. And then the empathy and understanding type of friendship, a good friend is someone who is loyal, committed to you, and will share secrets with you, that intimate information. So we go from just being friends because you're at the same place at the same time and you like the same things, that's reward cost, to normative expectation where, oh, we're friends because this person's nice to me. And then the highest level would be empathy and understanding where, oh, we're good friends because we actually like to talk to each other. We share things about our lives with each other, and we are committed to each other and being loyal. So those are Bigelow and Lagaipa's categories. Selman, on the other hand, had 4 stages of friendship. And sometimes it might not go past stage 2, right? So with Selman, momentary physical interaction, that could be similar to, Bigelow and Lagaipa's reward cost, where you have that momentary physical interaction because you're on the same team. So you could think of it that way. Usually that's about 3 to 6 years old. So a friend in this stage is somebody you're playing with right now. In stage 1, one-way assistance is somebody who does nice things for you. So the one-way assistance maps onto the normative expectation part of Bigelow and Lagaipa. One-way assistance maybe more often be like ages 5 to 9. Stage 2, fair weather cooperation. That's somebody who treats you fairly. That's why fair weather and cooperation is like, oh, you are helping each other. It's not one way, it's mutual. And stage 3, intimate and mutual sharing. So that's somebody, so stage 3 and 4 would map onto empathy and understanding for Bigelow and Lagaipa. So in stage 3, intimate and mutual sharing, start to trust this person with details about your life, maybe some secrets. And then autonomous interdependence is, it's someone who accepts you and is loyal to you unconditionally and vice versa. So interdependence. And they don't need, that friendship doesn't have to be somebody you see all the time. It's autonomous interdependence. When you're at that stage, you could not see each other for years, but when you connect, it's like you never left each other, right? I'm sure many of us have those kind of friendships. So Selman had those different conceptualizations of friendships, and some of it does overlap with Bigelow and Lagaipa. So another aspect of friendship that researchers are really interested in have to do with peer relationships in what we call sociometric status. And this is really based on a classroom study. So sociometric status is the degree to which children are liked or disliked by their peers. So if you think about our classroom environment, it's not so much in college, right? Because you have different classes, but in grade school, you're all in the same class all day, right? You might have different teachers, but you have your same classmates. And so the way this study was conducted was that researchers came to a class and gave kids 2 pieces of paper. On one piece of paper, they were to write down the name of a classmate who they would love to have lunch with, spend time with, get to know them, think really great person. On the other piece of paper, they were to write down the name of a classmate who they did not like, who if they could, they would kick them out of the class. They don't like them at all. And so it was anonymous. The researchers gathered the information from the class and then started to see whose names popped up. So sociometric status was developed. These categories were based on, which names came up the most in the I want to have lunch with them, which ones came up the most with I don't like them, I wish they were out of this class, and then which ones kind of, in the middle, and then which ones weren't there at all. And so let's talk about the different categories. So if somebody is popular, it means that they showed up a lot on their names showed up a lot on that piece of paper where people want to have lunch with them. So viewed positively by many and negatively by few or none, right? So a popular person is somebody who the majority of people really like. What are some characteristics of popular kids? They tend to initiate interaction, so they're inclusive of others. They tend to be cooperative. They're sensitive. They have good emotional regulation. In other words, they don't have outbursts, and they're not aggressive. So generally, it's popular, not because like these aren't the mean girls type. We'll talk about that, right? These are really nice kids, and people, they're popular in a sense that people are aware of who they are, right? So they put their name down as someone they might want to get to know or spend time with. Rejected, on the other hand, are kids who are positively viewed by very few peers, but their name popped up in that I do not want this person in my class pile, right? So they're viewed negatively by many peers. So some of these kids are aggressive. Others might be withdrawn and just don't want to talk to people, right? So rejected. So there's popular. Those are the names that showed up a lot on the I want to have lunch with them category. And then rejected, those are the kids whose names showed up with the I don't want them in the class category. Neglected are kids whose names didn't show up at all, right? So they don't even know. Their classmates might not even realize they're in the class. So they're not mentioned. That's why it's called neglected. So these kids tend to be, not very different, probably shy. They're not noticed. Maybe they keep to themselves. So they don't do anything that make people view them negatively. But by the same token, they don't do anything to make people view them positively either. And that's why they fall under the neglected status. Controversial status. So these are the names that show up in both piles. That's why it's controversial. So they are both viewed positively by some students and negatively by other students. So this is where the whole mean girls idea comes up. So they have the traits of both popular and rejected kids. Sometimes they're viewed as arrogant or snobbish. So maybe it's just a select few really want to be with them, but other people hate them, right? So that's what it's called controversial. So bullies likely would fall under controversial because remember, bullies have their minions or their followers who really want to be like them, but then they have the rest of the class who don't like them. So bullies would tend to fall under the controversial category. So in terms of what are the correlations with these subtypes, right? So there are the major categories and there are subtypes. So popular pro-social children are those who, they are well viewed and they also have these characteristics that make them good leaders. People want to be with them, right? So they have good academic and social skills. You also might have popular antisocial children where they have relational aggression. So in other words, they might be liked by a lot, but they might do passive aggressive things like start rumors about people. Then you have the rejected, withdrawn children who are just kind of shy. They get bullied a lot because they're easy targets. They don't fight back, right? And then you have the rejected, aggressive children who are really loud, confrontational. People just don't like them and they avoid them, right? So these are kind of some subtypes. In terms of consequences, we do know that there are impacts, especially at this stage from middle childhood onwards. So those who were popular pro-social, right, tended to have stronger marriages, higher paying jobs, better health outcomes. Think about the characteristics that comprise somebody who is popular and pro-social. They know how to work with people. People like them. People like being with them. And so it's not a surprise really that they would have strong interpersonal relationships with others. And that will also follow with the higher paying jobs, because if your boss likes you, they'll promote you, that kind of thing. And they don't tend to have a lot of stress, so their health outcomes are quite good. On the other hand, unpopular children tend to have higher levels of anxiety, more depression, possibly suffer substance abuse, obesity, have health problems, and higher rates of suicide. So although you might think the sociometric status is like, why are we even looking at this? It's because they do have long-term consequences. And so we want to give kids those social skills to be able to get along with others, right? If they tend to be aggressive, let's find out why. And let's try to mitigate it because it does have long-term impact on their lives. All right, bullying. Unfortunately, middle and late childhood, it's a very frequent occurrence. So bullying is really unwanted aggressive behavior. And usually there is a power imbalance, whether it could be a physical power imbalance. And in other words, the bully could be somebody much larger than those who they're bullying. And oftentimes it could be kids who are older, maybe were held back and they have a lot of anger. One incident does not make it bullying, right? Bullying is repeated aggressive behavior toward another child with the intent to harm. What has changed is that it used to be only boys were considered the bullies. Well, it's done by both boys and girls. And the whole key to it is the bully wants dominance. They are establishing dominance with their peers. They want to control their peers. Cyberbullying is a type of bullying that occurs online, right? They're using electronic technology for it. So about 20%, 1 in 5 students in grades 9 to 12 say they've experienced bullying. And about 15% say they've experienced cyberbullying. I think it's higher now. So a lot of times, those who do the bullying, they lack self-esteem as well. So people who have really good self-esteem do not feel the need to harm others, right? So that's one thing to keep in mind. It's important for people in authority positions, teachers, mentors, they need to intercept. They need to stop the cycle of bullying. It's very, very important because there are a lot of negative outcomes as well. And a lot of times those kids who are being bullied don't speak up and it just keeps happening. So it's important for adults and people in positions of authority to stop it as soon as it starts. And we do see that this tends to peak in the transition between middle school to high school. Some consequences of bullying, the bully usually has high levels of delinquency, probably substance abuse, depression. They'll get the school failure happens because a lot of times they're going to get suspended. On the other hand, the targets, there's really important impacts there too. They will suffer depression. They might not want to go to school. They might drop out of school. And a lot of kids who are bullied end up committing suicide. Like a lot of times they feel like they can't go back to school. They have no one will help them. They just want the pain to stop. And then they commit suicide. So it's very serious. These are very serious actions that happen. We need to help. So what helps? Stop the bullying right away, right? As soon as it's noticed, it needs to be addressed. It's not going to go away by itself. The target needs to be supported and educated. The bully needs therapy, probably some kind of mentoring to stop it. There has to be a culture of acceptance in terms of, differences should not be viewed as deficits. We need to understand that there's a wide range of competencies and everybody can contribute in some way. And so it's really important for teachers to get that education on how to deal with bullying. Moving on from peers to family. So what are families supposed to do? So according to Berger, there are some main tasks. Number 1, think about Maslow's hierarchy. Provide food, clothing, and shelter. Basic needs, right? Children cannot thrive in an environment where they don't think they're going to eat. Or, there's a leaky roof and they're wet and they're cold and they're hungry and they don't have, proper clothing. All of that needs to be addressed, before they can go on to higher level needs. Encourage learning. So have that, maybe map out a little area that's quiet where they can do their, they can study, maybe have a study time. Those are ways that you can encourage learning. Developing self-esteem, remember at this stage is industry versus inferiority. So give them opportunities to set goals and to accomplish the goals, acknowledge the effort that goes into accomplishing these goals. Nurturing friendships with peers. So at this stage, remember, kids can't drive, right? So it's really, a lot of it is up to the family, the parents, to provide those opportunities for them to hang out with their friends in a safe environment. And then providing harmony and stability. So that kind of has that safe space. Home should be a safe place for kids. Now, kind of talking about family stability, right? So this is based, I don't remember what year, I'll have to look at what year this is based on, but intact family meaning both parents are living in the same household. That's about 65%. Single parent households comprise 32% of the population, and there are 3% of kids who don't have parents at all. So these would be kids in some sort of institution, maybe an orphanage, maybe foster homes. And there are unfortunately not great outcomes for kids who are in this situation. Not to say that you can't overcome a lot of the problems that happen, but it won't be overcome overnight. There's a lot of effort that goes into it. Cohabiting families, about 7%. Generally, many last less than 2 years on average. So that introduces a level of instability for the kids. Blended families, meaning that you have two parents together and there are kids from previous relationships and you're all living together. That's about 16%. And then same-sex families, about 1 in 61 million of the married couples. So many different family configurations. What we want is stability, right? So if you have an unstable family situation, it really increases the stress level on kids. And it could result in behavioral issues, could end up, kids might have social, emotional, and mental problems when they are in unstable family situations. So really number one job of families is to provide a safe, stable, supportive environment for the kids. The warmth, support, communication, and appropriate discipline. Those are all key to having a successful childhood. All right, so overall, we talked about the importance of industry, right? If somebody's industrious, they can set goals, they can accomplish goals, it helps their self-esteem. And when they compare themselves with others, they feel good about themselves. At this stage, we have the beginnings of moral development. Make sure you know the differences between Piaget's theory, which had to do with the heteronomous and autonomous levels, stages, 2 stages. And then there's Kohlberg's theory of the pre-conventional, conventional, and post-conventional stage. Make sure you understand the importance of friendships and peers. So the different types of friendships, the different categories in terms of sociometric status, the impact of bullying, and finally, the importance of family stability. So thank you all for joining me. I will stop sharing this, and hopefully if you have any questions, you'll feel comfortable asking. Take care. Bye-bye.